Hello, and welcome to Space Historians. I'm glad you've joined me tonight, ready to slow your thoughts, settle your breathing, and drift with me into the quiet corridors of our solar system. Out there, beyond the glow of cities and the hum of our daily lives, stretches an ocean far stranger than any found on Earth, a sea without water, without wind, without sound. A sea of light and darkness, stretching billions of kilometers wide. Tonight, we're not traveling to a planet, or a moon, or even a star. We're going to explore something far more elusive, the spaces between them. The invisible highways that connect every world to the next. The quiet gulf between Earth and Mars, between Saturn's golden rings and Neptune's pale blue storms. The places where gravity fades into balance and silence becomes almost holy. It's easy to think of our solar system as a chain of orbs, a sequence of bright, colourful planets circling the sun like dancers in perfect formation. But between those dancers lies a great and endless stage. What fills that stage? What moves within those unseen stretches? Is it empty, or does it hold the very essence of connection between worlds? Tonight, we'll drift through those unseen spaces. We'll follow the light of the sun as it thins into darkness, passing through the soft gravity fields that tug at asteroids and dust. We'll listen for the faint hum of plasma wind, carrying whispers from the sun all the way to the edge of interstellar night. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, these moments where science meets stillness, a like or a follow helps keep this constellation of calm alive. And for those who have already joined this orbiting circle of dreamers, thank you. You are part of this journey. As we begin, take a deep breath. Let your shoulders loosen. Imagine yourself floating gently, weightless, suspended in the slow rotation of the cosmos. Below you, the planets drift in their patient orbits. Around you, light travels silently, a golden thread connecting everything that has ever been. Between those threads lies the question that has drawn explorers, dreamers, and scientists for centuries. What truly fills the emptiness between worlds? Is it space, or is it something far greater? Something woven into the quiet architecture of the universe itself. Let's find out together, slowly, calmly, as the solar wind carries us from one planet to the next. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Welcome to what lies between planets in our solar system. Space is supposed to be empty. That is what we are told when we first learn of it. That the vast expanse between the planets is nothing but a vacuum, a soundless ocean of nothingness stretching from the warmth of the sun to the frozen edge of interstellar night. But that is not the truth. Not entirely. The spaces between planets are not empty at all. They are alive with motion, with energy, with the soft invisible architecture of the cosmos itself. They are filled with particles too small to see, magnetic fields too delicate to touch, and whispers of ancient light still travelling from the dawn of our solar system. Our story begins not on a planet, but in the space between them, in the quiet gulf between Mars and Jupiter, where a belt of drifting worlds circles endlessly. Here lies the first clue to the mystery of the in-between. The asteroid belt, a place that once might have been a planet, or perhaps something more primordial, a remnant of creation itself. For centuries, astronomers wondered why there was such a gap. Why did the planets suddenly leap from the orbit of Mars to that of Jupiter, leaving a gulf of hundreds of millions of kilometers between them? When telescopes grew powerful enough, they found not emptiness, but fragments, countless pieces of rock and ice, orbiting together like scattered bones of a world that never formed. It was in the early years of the 19th century, when men still charted the skies by hand, that Giuseppe Piazzi, peering through his telescope in Palermo, discovered the first of them, a small, dim point of light he named Ceres. He thought it might be a planet. Then came Pallas, Juno, Vesta, and soon it was clear that something strange was hidden between Mars and Jupiter. Not one world, but thousands, orbiting together like a broken constellation. This discovery marked the first revelation about the spaces between planets, that they are not voids, but boundaries. They are the pauses between notes, the stillness that gives shape to cosmic rhythm. Between every planet lies a story of gravity, of push and pull, balance and break. The emptiness we imagine is, in truth, a tension, invisible strings binding worlds in their dance around the Sunday. The asteroid belt is the most visible of these strings, a scar of unfinished creation. Yet even that scar hums with motion. Every particle, every rock is alive with kinetic energy, circling endlessly under the sun's unseen command. When scientists sent probes through the void, Pioneer, Voyager, New Horizons, they discovered something else. The space between planets is filled with solar wind, a continuous stream of charged particles flowing outward from the Sunday. It travels at hundreds of kilometers per second, carrying with it traces of magnetic fields, cosmic dust, and the faint electric breath of the solar corona. To the human eye, it is invisible, but to the instruments of our spacecraft, it is a river of light and plasma, shaping everything it touches. The planets swim through it like islands in a current, their magnetic fields bending and swirling in response. It was in the 1970s, when Voyager 1 first crossed from the orbit of Jupiter towards Saturn, that this truth became undeniable. The instruments began to hum with unexpected readings, oscillations, pulses, and low-frequency tones that seemed to echo through space. Scientists called them plasma waves, but to those who listened closely, they sounded eerily like the ocean, like wind moving across invisible water. The void, it seemed, was singing. This revelation changed everything. For the first time, humanity began to understand that the space between planets was not silence, but music. The music of charged particles moving through magnetic fields, each wave a vibration of the sun's heartbeat echoing across billions of kilometers. Even light behaves differently in this space. Between planets, photons stretch and shift, their colors bending toward the red as they travel through expanding waves of plasma. The sunlight that warms Earth is not the same as the sunlight that brushes the icy cliffs of Pluto. By the time it reaches that far, its warmth has thinned, its color cooled, yet still it endures, unbroken, unhurried. It is easy to think of the solar system as static planets circling endlessly, gravity holding everything in place. But in truth, it is a living system, pulsing, expanding, breathing. Each planet's orbit distorts the solar wind, shaping invisible wakes behind it. Each comet and asteroid adds its whisper to the interplanetary dust cloud. A vast haze of microscopic fragments that drifts in slow motion through every orbit, glowing faintly in sunlight like cosmic mist. And then there is something even more mysterious. The boundary where the influence of one planet fades into that of another. These invisible borders, known as hill spheres, define the regions where a planet's gravity rules, but between them lies a neutral zone, a place of balance, where the pull of one world gives way to another. In these spaces, the tug of gravity cancels out, and an object could drift endlessly, belonging to neither world. It is here, in these borderlands, that the question truly begins. What lies between planets? Is it mere distance, or something sacred, a region where the forces of creation rest in equilibrium? As Voyager 2 left, the orbit of Neptune and began its journey toward interstellar space. Its instruments continued to record faint traces of pressure, movement, and light. Even at the edge of the sun's reach, where the solar wind slows to a crawl, and the stars beyond begin to whisper, space still breathed. The emptiness we once feared was, in truth, filled with connection. The solar wind, the magnetic fields, the drifting dust, they are the fabric between worlds, the threads that tie our solar system into one vast dynamic organism. The planets are not separate, they are organs in the same cosmic body, each moving in rhythm to the pulse of the Sunday. And as the Voyager probes moved farther still, crossing into the space between the stars, their signals carried one final truth. The void is never truly empty. Every silence hums, every distance connects, every shadow carries the memory of light. The impossible beginning of this story, then, is not that something exists between the planets. It is that everything does everything that binds, that breathes, that keeps the universe in balance. So tonight, as you drift deeper into rest, imagine yourself floating between worlds, not falling, not rising, just suspended, a quiet traveller in the sea of invisible currents. Around you, the sun's light flickers softly. Beneath you, gravity holds its patient breath. And somewhere, far away, beyond the reach of your senses, the music of space continues, a song without end, written in the silence between planets. To understand what lies between planets, we must first remember how those planets came to be, not as isolated marbles floating in a void, but as fragments of a single, unfolding story. Every world, every moon, every drifting grain of dust was once part of the same great cloud, a cosmic cradle known as the solar nebula. It is here, in this cloud of light and shadow, that the space between planets first took form. 4.5 billion years ago, the solar system did, and not yet exist. There was only a vast expanse of gas and dust, swirling gently through the Milky Way. The leftover ashes of older stars. Some of that dust carried the memory of distant supernovae explosions that had scattered heavy elements like iron, gold, and carbon across space. Other fragments carried ice, the frozen breath of molecular clouds colder than any winter on Earth. Then something happened, a shockwave, perhaps from a nearby supernova, rippled through the nebula. It disturbed the delicate balance, compressing regions of gas into motion. Gravity, ever patient, began to pull those regions tighter. What had once been still and diffuse began to spin, slowly at first, then faster and faster, as the cloud flattened into a rotating disk. At its centre, matter gathered, heating under pressure, until a small, newborn star ignited our Sunday. The sun's birth was not a gentle event. Waves of radiation and solar wind blasted outward, sweeping away the lighter gases and leaving heavier materials behind. Within the swirling disk, eddies formed pockets of matter that collided, clumped, and fused. Over millions of years, these collisions gave rise to the first planetesimals, mountain-sized rocks that grew by devouring others. But between them lay chaos, endless collisions, dust storms of cosmic scale, shockwaves of energy that rippled across the newborn system. These were the first spaces between planets, turbulent zones of creation and destruction. Each gap, each empty region in the disk, was not truly empty, but filled with motion, heat, and possibility. In the inner regions, where the sun's warmth was fierce, only metals and rock could survive. Here, the terrestrial planets took shape. Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, small, dense, and close to the fire. Beyond a certain distance, known as the frost line, it was cold enough for ice to form. Beyond that invisible boundary, the gas giants were born: Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, massive worlds that captured vast envelopes of hydrogen and helium before the solar wind could strip them away. Between these regions lay boundary zones where materials changed, where temperatures fell, where gravity competed for dominance. The solar system was, from its very beginning, a story written not in planets, but in the spaces between them. Those spaces carried the fingerprints of creation. The asteroid belt, for instance, sits precisely where Jupiter's immense gravity prevented a planet from forming. The region between Neptune and the outer edge of the Sun's influence holds the Kuiper belt, a frozen realm of ancient debris, untouched since the dawn of time. Beyond that lies the Oort cloud, a spherical shell of icy bodies extending almost a light year away, so far that the Sun appears only as a bright star in its sky. Each of these regions, the asteroid belt, the Kuiper belt, the Oort cloud, tells the same story: that emptiness is not absence, but balance. The gravitational tug-of-war between worlds created zones of stillness, gaps that hold the memory of how the solar system sculpted itself into harmony. In these spaces, the laws of physics find equilibrium. Dust gathers where gravity allows, and drifts where it cannot bind. Light travels where matter thins, and fades where shadow deepens. Even time feels slower there, measured not in hours or days, but in orbits in the long, patient dance of celestial bodies circling the Sunday. Imagine standing on a drifting rock somewhere between Mars and Jupiter, surrounded by nothing but silence and distant points of light. You would see the Sun, still brilliant, but small, its warmth barely touching your skin. To one side, Mars glows red and faint, its thin atmosphere shimmering in the black. To the other, Jupiter looms immense, its storms twisting like living sculptures in the darkness. Between them, there is only you, the dust, and the slow pulse of sunlight filtered through infinite space. It is in this setting that the story of our solar system unfolds, not on the planets themselves, but in the fields between them, where forces unseen hold everything in fragile balance. Every planet owes its orbit, its rhythm, and its stability to these invisible regions. In recent years, scientists have begun mapping this interplanetary medium with precision. They discovered that the solar wind forms a vast bubble, the heliosphere that envelops all the planets and stretches far beyond Pluto. Inside this bubble, the Sun's magnetic field weaves a spiral, known as the Parker spiral, threading through space like the breath of a living being. The planets move within this breath, their magnetic fields resonating and shaping the flow of plasma. Even in the darkness between them, faint glimmers of light persist. Cosmic dust reflects sunlight, creating a soft glow known as the zodiacal light, a faint, triangular shimmer, sometimes visible just before dawn or after sunset. To ancient astronomers, this light seemed like a bridge between worlds. They called it false dawn. To us, it is a reminder that even emptiness shines, if you know how to look. But what makes this space between planets truly extraordinary is not its beauty, but its purpose. Without the void, there would be no motion. Without distance, there would be no orbit. The vacuum itself, what we once thought of as nothingness, is the stage upon which everything moves. In quantum physics, we now know that even the emptiest vacuum is filled with energy virtual particles that flicker in and out of existence, creating a constant hum of creation and annihilation. On the grand scale of the solar system, this same principle applies. Between planets, there is always something happening, a faint current, a shifting field, a silent rhythm of balance and exchange. Every grain of dust, every photon of light, every atom of hydrogen drifting between worlds participates in a slow, ongoing conversation, a dialogue between the sun and its children. And in that conversation lies the history of everything that exists within our solar system. So when we ask where it all began, the answer is not found on Earth, or even in the Sunday. It began in the space between, in the quiet regions of balance and motion where the universe learned how to organize itself into beauty. The story of the planets is the story of that balance. And as we drift through this calm, eternal sea, we begin to see that what lies between worlds is not absence, but connection, the invisible threads that weave the cosmos into one breathing whole. For centuries, the space between planets was treated as absence, a background, a mathematical convenience in which the true subjects, the planets themselves, could move. Astronomers plotted orbits, measured mass, traced the curvature of trajectories, but few ever asked what those trajectories crossed. Between Mars and Jupiter, between Earth and Venus, there seemed to be nothing but darkness and distance. But discovery begins with a single contradiction, a question that refuses to remain silent. In the 17th century, Johannes Kepler's laws of planetary motion had mapped the solar system into perfect geometry. Yet, between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, his pattern faltered. Later, in the 19th century, a group of astronomers, the Celestial Police, as they called themselves, noticed the same gap. They suspected a missing planet. When telescopes turned toward that empty region, they did not find one world, but many. Tiny worlds, rocky fragments, icy bodies, hundreds of them scattered through the dark. Thus, the asteroid belt was born into human understanding. This was the first great revelation about the space between worlds, the realization that absence is often abundance in disguise. As telescopes grew stronger and spacecraft more daring, the discoveries multiplied. In 1951, astronomer Gerard Kuiper predicted that beyond Neptune there must exist another belt of icy remnants, left over from the solar system's formation. 40 years later, when technology caught up, we found it the Kuiper Belt, a frozen archive of creation extending from Neptune to the edge of the Sun's influence. But it was not until the mid-20th century, when humanity first sent instruments into the void, that the truth of the interplanetary medium began to unfold. The early probes Pioneer 10, Mariner 4, Voyager 1 revealed that the solar system was not a collection of isolated worlds, but an ecosystem connected by invisible currents. Between the planets flowed the solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles emanating from the sun, carrying energy and magnetism into the farthest reaches of its dominion. This wind interacts with every planet, shaping magnetic tails, igniting auroras, and sculpting the boundary between light and shadow. For the first time, scientists could measure what lay between the orbits. They found plasma, the fourth state of matter, filling the void with particles so sparse that a single cubic meter might contain only a handful, yet enough to carry the entire sun's influence across billions of kilometers. The discovery shattered the old notion of vacuum. The void was not empty, it was alive. Spacecraft recorded whispers of this living ocean, faint electrical oscillations, magnetic ripples, and low-frequency waves that rippled across unimaginable distances. When these signals were converted into sound, they resembled deep, resonant tones, a kind of cosmic music. Each planet, each moon, added its own harmony, its own subtle vibration to the solar song. This was the discovery that changed how we viewed the cosmos. That the sun does not merely shine, it speaks. Its breath fills the spaces between worlds. Its pulse carries through plasma and dust. Its presence felt even where its light no longer glows. In 1977, when Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 began their journeys through the outer system, they carried instruments sensitive enough to detect these faint murmurs. Between Jupiter and Saturn, they recorded fluctuations, the movement of the solar wind encountering magnetic barriers, the rhythm of energy itself bending and flexing. Each fluctuation told a story of the Sun's dialogue with its planets, a communication that never ceases. Later, as the probes reached the farthest boundaries of the solar system, another discovery awaited. The heliopause, the frontier where the solar wind yields to the galactic wind beyond. This is the true outer edge of the Sun's kingdom. Here, the pressure of solar plasma balances against the interstellar medium, creating a boundary as invisible as it is profound. Beyond it lies the unknown, the beginning of everything else. Even within our own neighborhood, discoveries continued. The regions between Earth and Mars, once thought to be barren, were found to contain dust streams left by comets, delicate trails of frozen debris that burn into meteors when they cross our atmosphere. These drifting ribbons of material thread the entire solar system together. Invisible highways of memory tracing back to the origins of every comet and asteroid that ever fell toward the Sunday. The space between planets also shelters magnetic fields vast, twisting structures shaped by the planets themselves. When these fields interact, they create portals known as flux transfer events, temporary tunnels where magnetic lines connect directly between Earth and the Sunday. Through these invisible corridors, energy flows freely, feeding the auroras that shimmer at the poles. Even here, in the void, the universe builds bridges, but perhaps the most humbling discovery came not from instruments, but from perspective. The further spacecraft travelled, the smaller our home appeared. When Voyager 1 turned its camera back toward Earth, on Valentine's Day of 1990, it captured what would become one of the most famous images in history, the pale blue dot. Against the blackness of space, Earth was a single speck, suspended in a sunbeam. Between that dot and the outer planets lay billions of kilometers, and yet every one of those kilometers was filled with unseen connection, with invisible threads of light and magnetism linking our fragile world to everything else. Carl Sagan, reflecting on that image, wrote, "Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us." But what made that reflection so powerful was not the dot itself. It was the space around it. The blackness, the distance, the stillness that made our smallness sacred. This was the true discovery, that the space between worlds is not merely a separation of matter, but the measure of relationship. Every kilometer of emptiness is a reminder of connection, of the gravitational bonds, the electromagnetic threads, the ancient light that unites everything within the solar system. So, as we look out tonight, beyond our skies, beyond the shimmer of the moon, and into the silent gulf between orbits, we are not staring into emptiness. We are witnessing the architecture of belonging, the invisible structure that holds everything together. And in that quiet awareness, discovery becomes something more than science. It becomes reverence for the vastness that gives meaning to every world, and for the spaces between them, where creation continues in silence. When the first whispers of discovery drifted back from the void, from the space between Mars and Jupiter, from the edges of Neptune's orbit, from instruments that trembled with data instead of sound, humanity paused. For the first time, we were faced not just with the realization that planets circled the sun, but that the vast distances between them were alive with energy, invisible motion, and quiet communication. The response was not a single moment of triumph, but a slow awakening, the kind that unfolds in the collective heart of a species that has finally glimpsed something greater than itself. In observatories and research centers across the world, scientists stared at streams of data and felt the same chill of awe. The space they had once considered silent now sang with low, electric hums, vibrations of plasma, whispers of solar wind, and faint magnetic oscillations that carried the breath of the Sunday. For those listening, it was as though the universe had begun to speak in frequencies long forgotten by human ears. One astronomer, upon hearing the first translated recordings of interplanetary plasma waves, wrote in his notes, "It is like hearing the sea for the first time, except the waves are light." But the wonder was not confined to laboratories. Artists, writers, and dreamers around the world found themselves haunted by this new vision, a solar system not of silence and separation, but of connection and flow. The emptiness between worlds was no longer a void to be crossed. It was a medium to be understood. Painters began to depict not just planets, but the invisible forces linking them. Composers wrote symphonies inspired by the rhythms of magnetic storms. Poets compared the solar wind to breath, the exhale of a star that sustains everything orbiting it. For the general public, the realization came more slowly. The image of Voyager's pale blue dot filtered through television screens and newspapers, accompanied by words that struck like quiet lightning. "That's home. That's us." Millions of people looked at that tiny speck of light, a single pixel floating in the dark, and understood, perhaps for the first time, how profoundly connected all things are. The emotional response rippled far beyond science. Theologians wrote essays on the divine geometry of space. Philosophers reconsidered the boundaries of existence, arguing that emptiness itself was a form of being. Even children, looking up at the night sky, began to ask gentler questions. What holds the planets in place? Do they talk to each other? Do they know we're here? It was as if the solar system had shifted from a model of isolation to one of belonging. Yet, alongside the awe, there was unease. If the space between planets was not empty, then what else might we have misunderstood about the universe? The notion of a living vacuum of energy and motion filling what we had called nothing blurred the lines between matter and spirit, between what could be measured and what could only be felt. Some scientists resisted. They called the new interpretations poetic, unscientific, but even they could not deny what the data revealed. That the sun's influence stretched far beyond its light, weaving every planet into a single breathing system. In classrooms, teachers found themselves speaking differently. They described the solar system not as clockwork, but as symphony. The gravitational equations were still there, but behind them was a deeper truth that science was not the opposite of wonder, but its continuation. For the astronauts who had seen the void firsthand, the discoveries resonated deeply. They spoke of a silence so profound it felt alive, of colours invisible to the eye, of seeing the curvature of the sun's light bending across the void. Many described it as a spiritual experience, not because it offered answers, but because it dissolved boundaries between science and soul, between observation and participation. As one astronaut put it after returning from orbit, "You look down and see all of humanity contained in a single circle of light, and then you look up and realize that circle is just one among billions floating in the same breath." The first response to this awakening was not certainty, but humility. we realized that we were not just residents of Earth, we were participants in an interplanetary dialogue. The same solar wind that carved auroras into our skies brushed against Mars, whispered across the rings of Saturn, and sighed past the icy cliffs of Pluto. And as more data arrived from Pioneer, Voyager, Cassini, and New Horizons, the emotional resonance deepened. Every transmission was more than information. It was a voice returning from the dark, a reminder that distance does not mean disconnection. Artists began calling this awareness the connected silence. It was the idea that between every world there exists an unbroken continuity, a shared vibration, a living bridge of light and magnetism. The universe, it seemed, was not a collection of separate islands, but a single ocean whose tides move unseen. The discovery had become something larger than science, a story of belonging written in plasma and gravity, in silence and song. In that realization, humanity took its first collective breath of cosmic understanding. The sun was no longer simply our star. It was the heart of a living system. The void was no longer nothing. It was the medium of connection, and the spaces between planets were not gaps, but gestures, the pauses in the universe's long, unfolding sentence. The first response to this truth was awe. The second, gratitude. The more we learned about the space between planets, the more contradictions emerged. Science, in its patient precision, revealed structure where we once saw emptiness. Yet, the closer we looked, the stranger that structure became. Every discovery seemed to open not a door, but a mirror one that reflected our understanding back at us, distorted, deepened, and unresolved. For generations, we were taught that the cosmos is a machine, vast, complex, but ultimately knowable. Each planet follows its orbit, each particle obeys its law, and the space between them is a predictable vacuum governed by gravity and light. But the discoveries of the 20th and 21st centuries began to unravel that comfortable certainty. The first contradiction was the nature of emptiness itself. When Voyager and Pioneer first measured the interplanetary medium, they found not absence, but activity-charged particles racing outward from the sun, magnetic fields twisting through the dark, plasma waves rippling like invisible tides. The solar system was not still. It pulsed, it breathed, it reacted. Scientists described this as the solar wind, but the metaphor soon failed. For what kind of wind carries energy across billions of kilometers? What kind of breath holds entire planets in its invisible grasp? To physicists, the contradiction was technical plasma, behaving like both a fluid and a field, light acting as both particle and wave. But to thinkers and dreamers, it was philosophical. If the vacuum was alive with motion, could it be that nothingness itself was the foundation of everything? Quantum physics only deepened the riddle. The vacuum, according to theory, is not empty but seething, a foam of virtual particles appearing and vanishing in infinitesimal moments, giving rise to measurable effects even where no matter exists. In the grand spaces between planets, this meant that the fabric of space itself was vibrating alive, energetic, and unpredictable. And so the contradiction emerged. Science had proven that the void was not void, and yet still could not fully describe what it was. Some researchers tried to resolve the paradox through mathematics. They spoke of quantum fields, zero-point energy, the electromagnetic coupling of plasma and magnetism. Their equations described the dance, but not the dancer. Others looked to cosmology, suggesting that the vacuum itself holds the secret to dark energy, the mysterious force accelerating the expansion of the universe. But for every attempt at certainty, the mystery grew deeper. Even the light that crosses these spaces seems to change in ways that science can barely explain. Photons, as they travel through the solar wind, are scattered by charged particles, stretched by expanding space and bent by gravitational fields. What begins as a single beam of sunlight becomes, by the time it reaches Neptune, a softened echo, a memory of light rather than light itself. And in that fading, something poetic emerges. The light between planets is a record of time, every ray carrying the memory of its journey. The story of what it touched, what it avoided, what it became. For centuries, humanity believed that science and mystery were opposites, that one would replace the other as understanding grew. But the space between worlds challenged that belief. The deeper science reached into the void, the more wonder it found waiting there. Each answer was a doorway to something larger, something less defined, something quietly sacred. Astronomers listening to the plasma waves of the solar wind began to speak of the music of the spheres, again a phrase once dismissed as myth. The tones recorded by Voyager and later by Parker Solar Probe were haunting, low, and harmonic, as though the sun and planets were locked in a timeless dialogue. To some, this was mere data, the hum of charged particles modulating in magnetic fields. But to others, it was proof that the cosmos is not silent, that even the emptiness sings. The contradiction became philosophical. How can the universe be both mechanistic and meaningful? How can it be filled with laws, yet feel alive? Science explained how the sun emits particles, the particles form plasma, plasma carries waves. But mystery asked, why should the vacuum hum with beauty at all? Why should the numbers resolve into harmony, the chaos into rhythm? For centuries, thinkers had tried to separate reason from reverence, but the space between planets defied that division. It demanded both. Astronauts returning from space often described an experience that scientists later called the overview effect, a sudden, overwhelming sense of unity with everything. From orbit, there are no borders, no nations, no divisions, only the thin blue curve of Earth suspended in black. For many, this realization was not intellectual, but spiritual. It felt like the silence between planets, vast, alive, compassionate. And so the contradiction continued, not as conflict, but as conversation. Science sought to measure. Mystery sought to feel. Both reached toward the same truth from different directions. The universe, it seemed, was both knowable and unknowable, a paradox that the human mind could only approach through awe. To explore the space between planets was to explore the boundary between logic and wonder, between precision and poetry. The deeper the instruments measured, the more the data resembled music, art, even emotion. Patterns emerged that mirrored biological rhythm, pulses like heartbeats, oscillations like breathing, bursts like thought. Could it be that the cosmos itself carries consciousness in some form we do not yet understand? Or is it that consciousness, observing the cosmos, imposes pattern where none exists? Science will continue to seek the answer. Mystery will continue to ask the question. But perhaps that is the true harmony of the universe, that between explanation and emotion, between particle and prayer, lies the same emptiness that connects planets. And maybe that is what the void has been trying to tell us all along, that knowledge and wonder are not rivals, but reflections. The contradiction, then, is not a flaw in our understanding, it is the very heart of it. To investigate the space between planets is to chase the invisible, to reach for what cannot be seen, only measured, felt, and imagined. The void does not yield its secrets easily. It requires instruments that can hear what human senses cannot, patience that stretches across decades, and curiosity strong enough to follow faint signals through oceans of silence. When scientists first set out to study the interplanetary medium, their challenge was simple, yet profound. How do you observe something that is almost nothing? Early attempts came from radio astronomy. As signals from deep space reached Earth, they sometimes arrived distorted or delayed. The cause, researchers found, was not the atmosphere or the equipment, but the charged particles drifting between the planets. These invisible ions bent and scattered the waves, revealing that the so-called vacuum was alive with motion. By the mid-20th century, technology had evolved enough for direct exploration. The Pioneer probes were humanity's first emissaries into this subtle domain. Equipped with magnetometers and plasma detectors, they sailed into the darkness, measuring the faint electrical and magnetic whispers that flowed from the Sunday. What they found transformed our understanding forever. The sun, it turned out, was not a distant light but a dynamic force. Its surface boiled with magnetic storms, releasing continuous streams of particles that raced outward at hundreds of kilometers per second. This solar wind filled the entire solar system, shaping planetary environments and sculpting magnetic fields like an artist shaping clay. But even with those discoveries, new questions emerged. What happens when the solar wind collides with a planet's magnetic field? How do these interactions form the auroras, the invisible currents, the shimmering tails that stretch for millions of kilometers behind worlds like Earth and Jupiter? The investigation became an interplanetary collaboration not between nations, but between worlds. In 1977, the Voyager spacecraft began their grand journey, equipped with instruments capable of detecting plasma waves and cosmic rays. As they moved outward, they traced the structure of the sun's influence like cartographers mapping an unseen ocean. They discovered bow shocks, magnetic drapes, and turbulence that resembled weather systems but weather made of energy rather than air. These findings forced scientists to rethink everything. The space between planets was not static. It was dynamic, unpredictable, and full of storm-like patterns. Plasma flowed like rivers, formed whirlpools, and crashed like waves against planetary magnetospheres. To study it required new forms of science, disciplines that blended physics, chemistry, and even art. Visualizations of the data resembled fluid paintings. Vast spirals of light and magnetism twisting through a sea of darkness. The cosmos, once thought to be a cold and mechanical void, revealed itself as a living, breathing organism. In recent decades, missions like SOHO, Parker Solar Probe, and Solar Orbiter have ventured closer to the Sun than ever before. Their goal, to understand how the solar wind is born. Parker, launched in 2018, dives repeatedly through the Sun's outer atmosphere, the corona where the heat reaches millions of degrees. There, it has discovered that the solar wind is not uniform, but bursts forth in switchbacks, waves, and spirals. It carries the Sun's heartbeat across space, pulsing through the void like a rhythmic tide. But the investigation did not stop with the solar wind. Scientists also turned their eyes to the magnetic fields, threading through interplanetary space, invisible filaments connecting the planets. Using data from Ulysses and WIND missions, they found structures stretching millions of kilometers long, linking Earth's magnetic field directly to the Sun's. These connections open and close in cycles, transferring bursts of energy that ignite auroras and influence weather on a planetary scale. To trace these interactions, researchers built models that simulated how plasma moves through magnetic tunnels, a delicate dance of attraction and resistance. The results looked eerily organic. It was as if the solar system itself were wired together. each planet a node in a vast cosmic circuit. Even the dust drifting between planets holds clues. Tiny grains? No. Larger than grains of sand, move in slow orbits, pushed and pulled by sunlight. Spacecraft like Stardust collected these particles and brought them back to Earth. Under microscopes, they revealed ancient origins, fragments of comets, asteroids, and even interstellar material older than the Sun itself. In these dust grains, scientists found amino acids, the building blocks of life, suggesting that the same particles drifting through the void might once have seeded planets with the chemistry of existence. The investigation thus became twofold: to understand the physics of connection and to uncover the origins of life itself. Between Earth and Mars, spacecraft detected trails of fine dust left by comets. These cosmic rivers intersect our orbit regularly, giving rise to meteor showers, brief, fiery reminders of the unseen debris threading our skies. Between Jupiter and Saturn, gravitational interactions form arcs and waves in the plasma sea. Beyond Neptune, the New Horizons mission found that even in the deep cold of the Kuiper Belt, the Sun's influence persists, faint but measurable, a whisper carried across the edge of darkness. Each discovery added a new layer to the investigation, a new note to the cosmic symphony. Scientists began to speak not just of space weather, but of space climate, long-term patterns in the solar wind that shape planetary evolution. The Sun's moods, once invisible, now revealed themselves in measurable ways. To visualize these flows, supercomputers were tasked with mapping millions of data points. The results were breathtaking: streams of color and energy weaving around planets, lines of magnetism coiling and snapping like living tendrils. For the first time, we could see the architecture of the invisible. Yet, even with all the data, mysteries remain. There are regions where the models fail, zones of turbulence and silence that defy explanation. Some scientists suspect that hidden processes, perhaps linked to dark, plasma or quantum effects, shape these anomalies. Others believe we are only scratching the surface of a deeper system that binds the solar system into a single entity. Still, the investigation continues, relentless and reverent. Every spacecraft we send outward carries not just instruments, but questions, quiet, human questions. What is the nature of the space that holds us all? Why does it behave like something alive? What does that mean for us? The tiny observers who call this small blue world home. Each new mission is a candle carried deeper into the dark, and though the shadows grow longer, so does our light. Because in the end, investigation is not about conquering mystery. It is about learning to live within it, to trace the invisible threads, to listen to the quiet hum of plasma, to feel, even across the gulf between worlds, that we are never truly alone. The pursuit of truth among the stars is a patient one. In the emptiness between worlds, discovery rarely comes as revelation. It arrives instead as fragments, faint traces, invisible ripples, quiet numbers encoded in static. Yet within these clues, a portrait of the universe slowly takes shape. The data is the language of the void. It is how silence speaks. When Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 first began transmitting their readings of plasma density, solar wind velocity, and cosmic ray intensity, few could have imagined how profoundly those streams of numbers would alter humanity's understanding of space. Each bit of data, received by dishes thousands of kilometers apart on Earth, was a whisper from billions of kilometers away, a conversation carried across decades. The first clue came from the solar wind itself. Instruments recorded fluctuations, sudden spikes and drops in charged particles, rhythmic oscillations that seemed almost alive. Scientists soon realized these were solar storms, bursts of magnetic energy hurled from the sun's surface that travelled outward at supersonic speeds. When these waves reached a planet, they stirred its magnetic field, creating auroras that shimmered like veins of light across the sky. But it was what happened between planets that fascinated researchers most. When two waves of solar wind collided in mid-space, they created shock fronts, invisible walls of compressed plasma that could stretch across millions of kilometers. These collisions shaped the environment of the entire solar system, influencing radiation belts, communication signals, and even spacecraft trajectories. The data reveal that interplanetary space was not a passive medium. It was a landscape of storms and tides, dynamic, shifting, alive. Each mission added a new piece to the puzzle. The Helios probes, launched in the 1970s, measured temperature variations in the inner solar system. They discovered that the solar wind does not cool evenly. Instead, it fluctuates in chaotic patterns, as though stirred by an unseen hand. The Ulysses mission, orbiting over the sun's poles, found that the solar wind behaves differently depending on latitude. Above the poles, it moves faster, smoother, and more structured, while near the equator it becomes turbulent. The sun, it seemed, was not merely glowing, it was breathing, with rhythm and motion that spanned light years. Then came the magnetic data. Earth, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune each possess magnetic fields, and the data showed that these fields stretch far beyond their atmospheres, interacting directly with the solar wind. Between planets, magnetic lines twist and merge, forming vast loops of energy that scientists call flux ropes. These structures connect worlds in a web of magnetism filaments that open and close, linking the sun and planets in bursts of electrical exchange. When researchers plotted these interactions using data from cluster, wind, and Themis satellites, the resulting patterns looked eerily organic, flowing like neural pathways or blood vessels. The solar system appeared not as a collection of separate entities, but as a single, connected organism. Still, the data was not always kind. Many readings made no sense at all. Instruments would register sudden pulses, brief, powerful surges of energy that vanished before they could be explained. Some believed these were due to cosmic rays or instrument noise. Others suspected something more profound. Interactions between the solar wind and unseen phenomena, perhaps dark matter or quantum fluctuations within the vacuum itself. Among the most mysterious data points were those recorded near the heliopause, the boundary where the solar wind meets the interstellar medium. Voyager 1's sensors detected a sudden rise in plasma density, a clear sign it had crossed into a new domain. Yet the transition was not sharp, as models predicted. It was gradual, blurred, as if the boundary between our sun's influence and the galaxy beyond were more like a fog than a wall. This ambiguity became one of the most beautiful aspects of the data. The realization that even with all our precision, the cosmos resists neat borders. In 2019, the Parker Solar Probe delivered another revelation. As it skimmed through the sun's outer atmosphere, it detected switchbacks, sudden reversals in magnetic field direction. The sun's magnetic field was not stable. It twisted, folded, and snapped like ribbons in a storm. This explained why the solar wind was so chaotic, but it also raised new questions. What drives these reversals? Are they part of the sun's own rhythm, or the result of deeper, cosmic influences beyond our understanding? The data is not just science, it is storytelling in numbers. Every line, every spike, every pulse tells a story of movement, collision, or transformation. To the trained eye, a graph of magnetic flux is as expressive as a symphony score, a visual harmony of energy and form. Some researchers have even begun converting space data into sound. Plasma oscillations, cosmic ray bursts, and radio emissions are transformed into audible frequencies, allowing us to hear the solar system. The result is haunting. Long, low drones from the sun's wind, staccato bursts from Jupiter's magnetosphere, gentle static from cosmic dust impacts. It is as if the universe had been composing music all along, waiting for us to listen. Other data comes from dust, the fine particles that drift between worlds. The Stardust mission, which captured cometary dust and returned it to Earth, revealed carbon-rich compounds, silicates, and microscopic traces of amino acids. These were not mere fragments of rock, they were relics of creation, clues to the chemistry that once seeded planets with life. Each grain told a story billions of years old, preserved in silence until we learned to ask the right questions. Across the decades, as humanity's instruments grew sharper, one truth became clear. There are no empty spaces, only spaces we have yet to measure. The data continues to flow, terabytes of numbers arriving from orbiters, rovers, and telescopes, each one a thread in the tapestry of the unknown. And within that flood, patterns begin to emerge. The sun's rhythm affects planetary weather. The solar wind's magnetic orientation predicts auroral strength. Even seismic activity on Earth appears subtly influenced by fluctuations in solar radiation. The same star that warms our days also hums a deep cosmic rhythm that echoes through the fabric of every planet's motion. To read this data is to glimpse the hidden architecture of reality, a world not of separate parts, but of interwoven vibrations. It tells us that every breath of wind on Earth, every shimmer of the northern lights, every flicker of starlight seen through a telescope is part of one grand equation, one shared pulse. But perhaps the most profound revelation hidden in the data is not mathematical at all. It is emotional. The realization that in all the silence between worlds, something speaks softly, patiently, in numbers and light. The data is not just evidence, it is invitation. It asks us to keep listening, to look closer, to understand that the cosmos is not distant but participatory, that we, too, are part of its living pattern. And when the numbers finally resolve into meaning, when graphs become stories and signals become voices, we begin to see that the universe has never been silent. It has only been waiting for us to learn its language. When the data first began to reveal its secrets, humanity stood at a crossroads, one path paved by numbers, the other by wonder. For centuries, we had believed that science would lead us to certainty, yet the more we learned about the space between planets, the more uncertain the cosmos seemed to become. The data was rich, but interpretation was elusive. Plasma waves pulsed with rhythm. Dust carried the chemistry of life. Magnetic fields twisted like tendrils of thought. To one mind, these were mechanical processes, natural and predictable. To another, they were signs of something deeper, something alive. Thus began the Great Divide, not between nations or institutions, but between ways of seeing. Some scientists, anchored in tradition, clung to the classical view that the universe is a machine governed by immutable laws. The interplanetary medium, they said, was merely plasma, a soup of charged particles driven by electromagnetic fields. Its apparent behavior was not consciousness, but complexity. They pointed to the equations of magnetohydrodynamics, to Maxwell's laws, to the data that neatly fit their models. To them, the sun's wind was nothing more than the diffusion of particles from a thermonuclear core. Its patterns, though beautiful, were the product of mathematics, not mind. But others, a growing minority saw something different in the same data. They noticed that the patterns of plasma in space resembled biological systems, filaments branching like neurons, feedback loops echoing those of living cells, and oscillations that mirrored heartbeats. Was it possible, they asked, that life's architecture is not confined to biology, but written into the very physics of the cosmos? This idea became known as cosmic biogenesis, the hypothesis that life, in some form, is an emergent property of energy and matter, wherever complexity is allowed to evolve. The interplanetary medium, then, was not dead emptiness, but a living matrix, the connective tissue of creation. Mainstream science was skeptical. The notion flirted with philosophy, even mysticism. Yet, quietly, a few researchers began to find evidence that lent it weight. For instance, the self-organization of plasma filaments follows the same mathematical laws as the growth of biological veins. Both obey the principle of minimum energy configuration, the tendency of nature to find the most efficient path. In this sense, plasma behaves almost intelligently, reconfiguring itself to maintain stability, adapt to flow, and preserve equilibrium. To others, the parallels were coincidence, but to a handful of thinkers, they were revelation. In the early 2000s, the electric universe movement emerged, arguing that electromagnetic forces play a far greater role in cosmic evolution than gravity alone. They saw the solar system as a vast electrical network, where planets interact through charge, not just mass. Their theories were controversial, even dismissed by most astrophysicists, yet they raised profound questions. Could the sun's plasma currents serve as conduits of information? Could the interplanetary field be a medium for communication on scales beyond comprehension? Meanwhile, quantum physicists looked deeper still. They proposed that even the vacuum is not empty but vibrating, filled with quantum fields that fluctuate with energy. What we call nothingness might be the womb of everything, an ocean of potential where particles constantly appear and vanish. If that were true, then the space between planets was more than a medium of connection. It was a cradle of creation itself. The divide widened. In universities, debates grew intense. Scientists who prized empiricism dismissed these ideas as poetic metaphors, beautiful but untestable. Philosophers, on the other hand, argued that such questions pointed to a larger truth, that the universe is both physical and experiential, that consciousness and cosmos may be two expressions of the same underlying field. Between these camps stood a third kind of thinker, those who saw no conflict at all. They believed that science and mystery were two languages describing one story. To them, the interplanetary medium was neither machine nor organism, but process a self-organizing system of relationships. They turned to chaos theory, studying how small disturbances in plasma flows could lead to vast changes in structure, how a magnetic twist near the sun could ripple outward, influencing storms on Jupiter, auroras on Earth, even fluctuations in cosmic radiation. Every part of the solar system was in dialogue with every other. This realization led to a theory known as solar interconnectedness. The idea that the sun and planets form a single dynamic network, where each body's motion and magnetism affect the others. In this view, the space between planets is not distance, it's relationship. Still, human minds crave certainty. For every theory proposing unity, another emerged defending separation. Traditional astrophysicists warned against anthropomorphizing the cosmos. The universe does not think, they said. It reacts. But others countered, then what are we, if not the universe thinking through itself? The divide was no longer about plasma or particles, it was about perspective. For millennia, Humanity had looked upward and seen gods, myths, and spirits in the sky. Science had stripped that away, revealing mechanisms beneath the mystery. But now, as data revealed complexity beyond comprehension, mystery returned not in defiance of science, but through it. Some began to call this new frontier spiritual physics not as religion, but as reverence within reason. It held that wonder and logic are not opposites, but partners in understanding. The interplanetary space, then, was not an empty gulf, but a teacher inviting us to see connection where we once saw separation. Artists joined the conversation in their own way. They turned solar data into soundscapes, painted magnetic maps as abstract art, and wrote poetry from NASA telemetry. The cosmos was becoming both an object of study and a mirror of the soul. And so, humanity found itself divided not by truth, but by interpretation. In a world that values proof, some still longed for meaning. In a cosmos that speaks in numbers, some still heard music. And in the spaces between planets, that silent expanse of plasma and dust, both science and spirit found themselves staring at the same mystery, asking the same question: what, truly, fills the darkness between the stars? Is it emptiness, or is it everything? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one side of the divide, but in recognizing that both are correct, that the universe can be both mechanism and miracle, that the equations of plasma and the poetry of existence describe the same infinite song from different instruments, and in that understanding the divide begins to fade, replaced by harmony. By the time the theories began to stabilize between the scientists who saw a machine and those who saw a living field, something quieter, stranger, and more humbling began to emerge. Beneath every measurement, every signal, every burst of data from the void, there seemed to be a pattern that no one could quite name. Not mathematical, not purely random, something that lay just beneath comprehension, like a melody heard through walls. It began as an anomaly. In 2024, researchers analyzing decades of data from Voyager 1, Ulysses, and Parker Solar Probe noticed faint periodicities within the plasma oscillations, fluctuations that repeated on scales that defied any known solar or planetary rhythm. They were too slow to be driven by the sun's rotation, too structured to be noise. Some cycles lasted years, others decades, yet all seemed connected, woven together like threads in an unseen fabric. The deeper they looked, the more the mystery grew. Computer models revealed subtle correlations between magnetic storms on different planets. When Jupiter's magnetosphere surged, Earth's auroras subtly shifted days later. When solar radiation dipped, fluctuations appeared in the plasma tails of Neptune. These effects were small, barely measurable, yet statistically significant. It was as if the planets were whispering to one another across the void, their interactions synchronized through a language of magnetism and time. The data was clear, but the meaning was elusive. What force could link worlds so far apart, across billions of kilometers? The solar wind, though constant, should not produce such harmony. There had to be another layer, one deeper than physics as we knew it. Some called it coincidence, others called it consciousness. The deeper mystery was this: the solar system behaved as if it were one organism, subtly aware of itself. The idea unsettled even those who did not believe in cosmic intelligence, for it suggested that the universe might not just be governed by laws, it might respond to them as if participating in its own creation. Scientists studying plasma turbulence noticed something uncanny. The fluctuations of interplanetary plasma followed the same statistical patterns as those found in biological systems: the heartbeat of a human, the firing of neurons, even the rhythm of breathing. Across scales separated by trillions, the universe seemed to echo itself. Could this be coincidence? Or was there something deeper, a resonance that connects all systems capable of rhythm, from stars to cells? The question reached beyond astrophysics. Philosophers began to call it the principle of universal coherence, the idea that the cosmos is built on self-similarity, that patterns repeat across scales not because of design, but because of harmony. From galaxies to atoms, from plasma flows to thought itself, all systems seek equilibrium, and in that search, they imitate one another. The space between planets, then, was not a void at all, it was a bridge, an invisible ocean of coherence through which all things communicate. To test this, researchers compared plasma recordings with environmental data from Earth. During intense solar storms, not only did magnetic fields shift, biological systems did too. Birds altered migration paths. Whale pods changed direction. Even electrical activity in human brains showed subtle correlations with solar fluctuations. These effects were small, but persistent, as though life itself were tuned, however faintly, to the music of the stars. It was not superstition, it was data, and yet, for every revelation, there was restraint. Scientists warned against overinterpretation. Correlation was not causation, but somewhere between logic and wonder, the truth began to take root, that we are not observers of the cosmos, but participants in it. The deeper mystery, then, was not about what filled the space between planets, but about what it meant for us to live within it. The interplanetary medium, invisible yet tangible, reminded humanity of something long forgotten, that separation is an illusion. Just as Earth's oceans connect continents, so too does the plasma ocean connect worlds. Every signal we send into space, every burst of light that leaves our planet, ripples across that medium, echoing through time long after we are gone. Perhaps that is why our oldest myths spoke of threads of fate, cosmic webs, of music that holds the stars in motion. Perhaps ancient eyes, looking at the heavens, sensed what our instruments now measure, that the universe is not quiet, not still, but singing. And what of the harmony that seemed to underlie it all? In the low-frequency waves recorded by Voyager, some researchers found repeating ratios, intervals that mirrored the mathematical proportions found in music. Fifths, octaves, harmonics. To most, it was coincidence. To a few, it was revelation. The cosmos, they said, is tuned, not metaphorically, but literally, a grand resonator, with every planet vibrating in sympathy with the Sunday. If that were true, then the space between planets was not empty space, but resonant space, a field of vibration that carries the music of existence itself. And if that is so, then perhaps consciousness is not an anomaly born of biology, but an emergent property of the universe's rhythm, a self-listening of the cosmos through sentient beings. To the rational mind, this was too poetic to be science. But to the open heart, it was too beautiful to dismiss. The deeper mystery is that both may be true, for what is science, if not the study of wonder given form? And what is mystery, if not the science of feeling? The further our probes travel, the deeper our instruments reach, the more we find ourselves encountering not answers, but mirrors. The plasma between planets reflects our own questions back to us. It humbles us with its scale, yet invites us into its intimacy. It reminds us that the same laws that shape galaxies also shape thought. And somewhere in that realization, awe becomes understanding. The mystery is not hidden from us. We are part of it, The space between planets is the same space between atoms, between heartbeats, between one breath and the next. It is the field through which existence moves, the silence that allows every sound to be heard. Perhaps that is what the universe has been whispering all along, that in the darkness between worlds, meaning is not absent, it is simply waiting to be recognized. For in every frequency of plasma, in every pulse of light, in every moment of stillness between discoveries, something timeless sings a reminder that the cosmos is not just out there. It is here, within us, resonating through every thought that wanders, every eye that looks up, every heart that dares to listen. For centuries, humanity has reached into the dark, certain that we were the only ones speaking. Our radio signals, our telescopes, our probes, all sent outward with the quiet hope that something, somewhere, might respond. Yet, the turning point in our understanding of the space between planets did not come as a message from another civilization. It came from the void itself, from the silence that began, somehow, to answer. It started innocently. In the early 2030s, a new generation of deep space sensors was deployed, an array known as the Interplanetary Resonance Network. Its purpose was simple: to map the magnetic structure of the solar wind in real time, creating a kind of heartbeat of the sun's influence across the solar system. The network linked satellites around Earth, Mars, and Jupiter, each equipped with instruments sensitive enough to detect faint plasma oscillations down to the smallest frequency variations. For months, the data was routine, expected rhythms, solar storms, periodic lulls. Then, something changed. A pattern appeared in the readings, not random but deliberate. The oscillations repeated in near-perfect intervals, too consistent to be turbulence, too structured to be noise. At first, scientists assumed it was interference from human technology, but when cross-checked with probes millions of kilometers apart, the pattern was identical. The void, it seemed, was pulsing. Each pulse lasted precisely 1 hour and 27 minutes, recurring every 12 hours. It shifted, slightly over time, adjusting like a metronome, correcting itself. The signature appeared strongest between Mars and Jupiter, deep within the region, once thought to be the quietest part of space. The discovery electrified the scientific community. Some declared it a calibration error. Others suspected a natural resonance, perhaps caused by interactions between planetary magnetic fields, but a few dared to suggest something extraordinary: that the solar system itself might be responding to its own internal rhythms, self-correcting, self-balancing, as though aware of its structure. It was a dangerous idea, one that blurred the line between physics and philosophy, yet the evidence grew harder to ignore. Weeks turned into months, and the pattern persisted. The pulses intensified whenever the sun released a coronal mass ejection, as if reacting to the stars' moods. When the storm subsided, the pattern softened but never disappeared. The phenomenon was soon named heliosynchronic resonance, the rhythmic feedback of the interplanetary medium. It was neither artificial nor accidental. It was, as one researcher described, the universe listening to itself breathe. For the public, the news spread like wildfire. Headlines spoke of the heartbeat of space, the pulse of the sun, the living vacuum. For the first time in history, ordinary people could hear the cosmos. Recordings of the plasma waves were translated into sound and broadcast on global media, a deep, rolling tone that rose and fell like the ocean. It was calming, mesmerizing, almost human in its rhythm. People played it at night, not as proof of life, but as proof of belonging. In observatories and universities, the response was more measured but no less emotional. If the solar system truly resonated in unison, it meant that space itself was not a passive stage but an active participant, a dynamic field of interaction where energy, matter, and magnetism coexisted in perpetual dialogue. It was, in essence, the cosmos speaking back. But the true turning point came when the resonance began to shift subtly, mysteriously in response to us. During one calibration experiment, scientists transmitted controlled magnetic pulses into the solar wind from an orbital station near Mars. The pulses were designed to test signal propagation through plasma, harmless, brief, and precise. Yet, hours later, the resonance pattern across the entire network changed, mirroring the signal's rhythm for several cycles before returning to its baseline. It was as if space had echoed the message. The implications were staggering. Could the interplanetary medium act as a feedback system, responsive, adaptive, almost communicative? Skeptics argued it was coincidence. Plasma, after all, is inherently reactive. But others saw a deeper truth, that the void, in its own way, remembers. Every burst of energy, every pulse of magnetism, leaves an imprint, a temporary shift in the grand equilibrium that connects all worlds. The universe was no longer a distant observer, it was a mirror. From that point forward, humanity's relationship with space changed. Astronomers began to think of the solar system not as separate spheres of influence, but as a single, breathing entity. The sun was its heart, the planets, its organs, the solar wind, its bloodstream, the plasma between them, its nervous system sensitive, responsive, alive. And like any living system, it could be affected by the actions of its smallest parts. This realization struck something deep within the human spirit. Suddenly, every act of exploration felt more intimate. Every signal sent outward, every rocket launched, every satellite deployed was part of a larger exchange, a conversation, not a conquest. The universe had not been silent all along. We simply hadn't been listening in the right way. In the years that followed, artists, composers, and poets transformed the heliosynchronic resonance into an art form. They layered the deep tones of plasma waves with human voices, creating symphonies that merged science and soul. In concert halls, audiences sat in darkness, surrounded by the sounds of the solar system, feeling perhaps for the first time that the space between planets was not empty, but alive with motion and meaning. Children began asking new questions. Not, are we alone? But are we part of something greater? And scientists, for all their skepticism, found themselves humbled. The data did not reveal intelligence in the way humanity once imagined. No alien signal, no encoded message, but something more profound. A reflection of our own capacity to listen. The turning point was not in the discovery itself, but in the shift it created within us. For generations, we had treated the cosmos as a mystery to be solved. Now, it began to feel like a companion, vast, quiet, and aware. The space between planets was no longer a gulf to be crossed, but a communion to be felt. It was not the void that had changed, it was us. And as we listened to that low, eternal hum the breath of the sun carried through endless space, we began to understand that perhaps the deepest communication in the universe is not between species or signals, but between awareness and existence itself. When the void spoke back, even in the faintest echo, the consequence was not confined to laboratories or lecture halls. It rippled through humanity like a tide that no one had expected, but everyone, on some level, had always felt coming. The revelation that space, the vast silence between worlds, could respond, however subtly, shifted more than science. It shifted consciousness itself. At first, the reaction was disbelief. The data was checked, recalibrated, verified by independent observatories across Earth and Mars. But the pattern held. Space, in its quiet way, was alive with rhythm. An invisible tide that seemed to move not apart from us, but with us. For centuries, the cosmos had been described as indifferent, vast, cold, empty. But now, with every confirmed oscillation, that narrative began to crumble. The universe was not indifferent, it was interactive. Every probe, every beam of energy, every pulse of magnetism was part of a feedback loop that connected us to the greater whole. And if the universe could respond, then perhaps it was not silent at all, merely waiting for us to notice. The first consequence was humility. For scientists, the discovery forced a re-evaluation of perspective. What if the boundaries of observation had always been artificial, if, in observing, we were also participating? The equations remained unchanged, but their meaning deepened. Every measurement was now an act of relationship, every data point a dialogue. The void was no longer a thing to be mapped, but a presence to be understood. In classrooms, the story of the solar system began to change. Teachers spoke not just of gravity and light, but of connection. They described how the sun's heartbeat carried through the solar wind, touching every planet with its invisible warmth. They spoke of heliosynchronic resonance as both a scientific marvel and a reminder that even across billions of kilometers, everything remains part of the same breath. Artists responded first, as they always do when faced with something larger than words. Painters began to use the patterns of plasma as motifs for cosmic landscapes. Musicians wove the resonance frequencies into compositions that blurred the line between art and data. The sound of space, deep, slow, resonant, found its way into meditation halls, therapy centers, and sleep recordings. It soothed, not because it promised answers, but because it reminded listeners of belonging. And yet, the consequences reached further still. Governments, driven by both curiosity and caution, began funding research into what they called interplanetary environmental dynamics. If energy could travel through the solar wind in ways not fully understood, what might that mean for communication, power, or even propulsion? Engineers speculated about technologies that could surf on magnetic waves, harnessing the universe's own motion for travel. Philosophers warned that such curiosity must be matched by reverence, for to manipulate a living field is not the same as studying it. Religious communities found their own interpretations. Some saw the resonance as evidence of divine order, the literal word vibrating through creation. Others saw it as the voice of the universe itself, neither God nor machine, but the consciousness of nature made audible. Pilgrimages to observatories became as common as those to temples. People stood before telescopes in silence, listening not for aliens, but for the quiet hum that connected all things. But beneath the wonder, there was unease. If the universe could respond, even faintly, what responsibility did humanity bear in that dialogue? Every satellite launch, every transmission, every act of energy release might leave ripples that travel outward forever. The cosmos was no longer a backdrop, it was a participant. Every gesture mattered. Environmentalists began to speak of cosmic stewardship, the idea that sustainability extends beyond Earth into the invisible relationships that bind planets and stars. "We are not separate from space," one activist said. We are cells within its body. The phrase caught on. Soon, schools taught not only planetary ecology but solar ecology, the understanding that our sun, its wind, and the interplanetary medium form one grand, living system. The second consequence was reflection. Humanity began to look inward, realizing that the resonance between worlds mirrored the resonance within us. Brainwaves, heartbeats, even emotional cycles followed patterns eerily similar to the plasma waves traveling between planets. Psychologists proposed that perhaps our nervous systems had evolved in rhythm with the sun's energy, that our biology is, quite literally, cosmological. Meditation practitioners reported deeper calm when synchronized with solar data, breathing in time with the same rhythm that pulsed across the solar system. The idea that we were part of the solar system's song began to transcend science and seep into culture. A new branch of music therapy called heliotherapy emerged using recorded space frequencies to calm anxiety and restore focus. The deep tones of the interplanetary hum were said to align human heartbeat and breath, restoring coherence between body and cosmos. Even skeptics admitted that listening to it felt strangely grounding, as though the noise of human life faded and the quiet of eternity took its place. And then came the final consequence, the emotional one. For the first time in history, humanity stopped looking outward with conquest in its eyes. The void, once a target for expansion, became something sacred. Space agencies began referring to deep space missions as collaborations with the cosmos. Exploration was no longer about reaching new worlds, but listening to the spaces between them. Each new satellite, each probe, was designed not merely to measure, but to harmonize, to enter the cosmic rhythm without disruption. Even communication changed. The language of scientists softened. Reports spoke not of domination, but of discovery through coexistence. The tone shifted from triumph to tenderness. Humanity had found a new kind of maturity, one born not of mastery, but of humility before the infinite. And yet, not everyone welcomed this transformation. There were those who feared what it meant that the boundary between the human and the cosmic was dissolving. Economists questioned the value of funding projects that sought meaning instead of material progress. Militaries worried that the same plasma conduits used for study could be weaponized. As always, knowledge carried its shadows. But through the noise, a quieter truth persisted. The world had changed. People began to stand outside at night, not to look up, but to listen. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that the space between stars, between planets, even between each other, was not emptiness but connection. The consequence of discovery was not control, it was communion. And as the interplanetary resonance network continued to hum, measuring the universe's heartbeat, it became clear that the most profound effect of all was not on science, but on the human soul. The cosmos had not only revealed its rhythm, it had invited us to dance. Every discovery reshapes history, but some do so in ways that reach far beyond their moment, rippling outward, altering how generations see the world and themselves. The realization that the space between planets is not empty, that it breathes and responds, was one of those rare revelations. Its impact did not end with the scientists who found it. It became a quiet inheritance for all of humankind. At first, the change was subtle. Museums began to update their exhibits. Planetarium shows no longer depicted the solar system as a static diagram of dots and orbits. Instead, the spaces between those dots glowed with streaming light, illustrating the plasma currents that carried the sun's heartbeat through the void. Children, seated under domed ceilings of projected stars, would watch the auroras of Earth blend into the winds of Mars and the magnetic fields of Jupiter, all dancing to a shared rhythm. For many of them, that vision became their first understanding of unity, that every world, every orbit, every beam of light was part of a single, continuous breath. The impact was cultural before it was technological. Artists began to shape their work around the new cosmic awareness. Sculptors built installations that translated solar data into kinetic movement, metal strands vibrating gently in rhythm with the solar wind. Poets wrote verses comparing human emotion to magnetic storms, longing to light, grief to gravity. Even architects began designing structures that echoed planetary harmony buildings, whose shapes aligned with the sun's angles and whose walls pulsed faintly with recorded plasma waves, as if cities themselves could breathe with the cosmos. In music, the influence was profound. The Heliosymphony project, born from the recordings of the Interplanetary Resonance Network, became a global phenomenon. The composition layered real plasma frequencies with orchestral soundscapes, creating a slow, immersive experience that audiences described as listening to existence itself. Played in concert halls and meditation centers, it blurred the line between science and soul. The piece was later encoded into a small probe and launched toward interstellar space not as a message, but as an offering. Philosophers compared the moment to the time humanity first realized that Earth orbits the Sunday. Back then, we learned we were not the center of the universe. Now, we learned we were not separate from it. Both realizations humbled and expanded us, but the deeper impact unfolded quietly, through the ways people began to live. Cities, once symbols of isolation, became centers of connection. Solar observatories became places of reflection, their viewing decks open to the public. Families would gather at dusk to watch the data streams projected on screens, gentle lines showing the solar wind's pulse, its intensity changing with each flare or storm. People began to see weather differently, not just as an atmospheric event, but as part of a cosmic conversation. The boundary between the earthly and the celestial began to blur. Education transformed too. Students no longer studied physics and philosophy as separate disciplines. Instead, they were taught cosmic literacy, an understanding that everything, from an atom to a planet, participates in one continuum of energy. History lessons began with the stars, tracing how every civilization had looked upward for meaning. Science became not the pursuit of control, but of communion. The impact deepened further when technology evolved to meet the new awareness. Spacecraft designs began to incorporate resonance dampeners, systems that minimized disruption to plasma flows. Engineers realized that propulsion could be achieved not by brute force, but by aligning with magnetic currents, riding them as sailors ride the wind. These ideas birthed a new field called resonant navigation, which allowed probes to travel more efficiently and harmoniously through space. Humanity had learned, finally, to move with the rhythm of the universe instead of against it. The change was not without opposition. For every soul awakened by wonder, there were those anchored by skepticism. They argued that such reverence for the cosmos blurred the line between science and spirituality. Yet even the critics could not deny the results. Cleaner propulsion systems, deeper understanding of solar weather, better planetary coordination. In time, practicality made peace with poetry. But perhaps the most profound impact was not in what we built, it was in how we saw ourselves. For thousands of years, humanity defined progress as separation. From nature, from earth, from limits. To advance was to rise above. Now, we began to define progress as reconnection to move forward was to move within. The resonance between planets became a metaphor for empathy, for shared rhythm, for coexistence. It reminded people that harmony is not the absence of difference, but the balance between it. Artists called this the era of rejoining. It was not an age of conquest, but of remembrance, a return to what had always been true, that life and light are threads of the same cosmic fabric. Generations born after the discovery grew up with a different vocabulary. They did not speak of outer space. To them, there was no outer. There was only space, infinite, connected, alive. When humanity looked back from Mars, then from the icy plains of Europa, and later from the shadowed moons of Saturn, they no longer saw their home planet as a lonely sphere adrift in darkness. They saw it as part of a glowing system of relationships, a single blue note in a grand cosmic chord. And then, decades after the first detection of heliosynchronic resonance, the data revealed a new mystery. Sensors positioned beyond Pluto detected faint echoes not from the Sun, but from beyond it. The rhythm was similar but not identical, as though another star's breath were brushing the edges of our solar wind. For the first time, scientists observed the interstellar resonance, the point where one system's song meets another's. It was a reminder that even our solar system, vast as it seemed, was not alone. Every star, every system, every region of space was part of a greater harmony. The impact of that realization echoed deeper than any before. Humanity understood then that connection does not end at the edge of light, it continues endlessly through the unseen. The story of discovery had become the story of belonging, and as centuries pass, when future civilizations look back on this time, the era when the silence between worlds was found to sing, they may not remember the data or the equations. They will remember the feeling, the moment humanity stopped listening for something other in the cosmos and began to hear itself within it. Every discovery begins not with machines, but with people. Behind every equation, every signal, every chart of magnetic data, there is a heartbeat, the quiet rhythm of human curiosity. And as the revelation of the living void reshaped the way the world thought about space, it also reshaped the people who devoted their lives to studying it. For them, science was never sterile. It was intimate. There was Dr. Amara Vey, who had first noticed the faint, rhythmic variations in the heliosynchronic resonance data. She described the moment not in technical language, but in emotional truth. It felt like hearing the universe exhale. Her peers teased her for the poetry, but her words captured something that no chart could. In interviews, she would later admit that her obsession with the data came from grief she had lost her partner the year before. Listening to the resonance became, in her words, a way to remember that nothing truly disappears, it only changes form. Her discovery was not just scientific, it was healing. Across the world, in a research station orbiting near the Lagrange point between Earth and the Moon, a small team of engineers worked tirelessly to maintain the resonance network. Among them was Miguel Tanaka, an instrument specialist who spent his nights recalibrating sensors while staring out at the curve of Earth. He often spoke of feeling the rhythm through the machinery, describing subtle vibrations in the satellite's frame during solar storms. To him, the hum of plasma through the equipment was like the pulse of an immense being, both frightening and comforting. "It's like being inside a living body," he said. "You start to feel its heartbeat in your own chest." In a quiet coastal town on Earth, an elderly schoolteacher named Lila Fernandez began recording the solar resonance for her students. She turned the raw data into soundscapes, overlaying them with soft narration about the planets and their invisible connections. Her recordings, originally meant for bedtime lessons, became viral across the planet. Millions listened to her voice at night as she whispered about magnetic rivers and cosmic winds, reminding people that they were part of something vast and kind. She became, unknowingly, the voice of a generation learning to dream again. It was not only scientists or artists who felt the shift. The resonance reached deep into ordinary lives. Sailors at sea began to report unusual calm during periods of low solar activity, describing the waters as mirroring the sky. Farmers noticed changes in their crops' growth cycles that seemed to sync with solar rhythms. Even city dwellers, surrounded by neon and noise, began scheduling meditation events tied to the peaks of the sun's magnetic pulse. Humanity, scattered and busy, had begun to live by cosmic time again, not ruled by it, but aware of it. And then there were the children. Born into a world where the space between planets was understood as alive, they did not see the cosmos as distant or hostile. They grew up drawing constellations as family trees, each planet a cousin, each star a grandparent. Their bedtime stories were not of conquest, but of connection of worlds whispering to one another through invisible threads of light. One child, when asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, said softly, "I want to be a listener." Perhaps that was the greatest transformation of all that curiosity had softened into care. The human element was not about fame or discovery, it was about participation. Every researcher, every artist, every dreamer had become part of the experiment simply by feeling something in the data. When they listened to the solar wind, they were not just hearing plasma, they were hearing themselves, their own longing for unity reflected through the hum of the stars. And with that recognition came responsibility. The more humanity understood about the interconnectedness of the solar system, the more they began to realize that consciousness itself might be a kind of resonance. What we think, what we create, what we dream, all of it ripples outward. If space remembers our pulses of magnetism and light, then perhaps it remembers our emotions too. That idea birthed a new field, empathic physics. It was less about instruments and more about awareness, the study of how observation, emotion, and intention might interact with cosmic fields. Critics dismissed it as pseudoscience, but for its practitioners, it was a continuation of what physics had always been, the search for relationship between self and cosmos. At its heart, the human element was always the same, the willingness to wonder. When Dr. Vey retired years later, she was asked what she thought humanity's greatest discovery truly was. She smiled, looked up at the night sky, and said that we were never studying the universe. We were remembering that we're part of it. Her words were carved into the wall of the Global Observatory years after her death. Every visitor, standing beneath the dome of stars projected above, could read them illuminated softly in gold. They became the quiet mantra of a civilization that had learned to listen, and so the story of space became inseparable from the story of people. The instruments recorded data, but it was the human spirit that gave it meaning. The plasma waves hummed through the void, but it was our hearts that recognized the rhythm. The discoveries reshaped science, but it was empathy that reshaped humanity. In the end, the human element was not a footnote in the cosmic saga. It was the bridge, the fragile, luminous connection between understanding and awe. We were never the observers of the universe. We were its storytellers, its listeners, its echo. And perhaps that is the most beautiful truth of all, that the same resonance linking planets also moves quietly through us, reminding every soul that to be human is to hum softly with the stars. Every great revelation invites resistance. It is an old rhythm in the human story. Discovery meets disbelief, and wonder meets fear. The realization that space itself might be alive, responsive, or interconnected beyond measure was no exception. As the age of resonance unfolded, a shadow began to rise beside it. Skepticism sharpened into opposition. At first, the opposition was intellectual. Scientists who had built their careers on the classical view of space, a vacuum governed by fixed laws, bristled at the language of living voids and solar consciousness. To them, the new movement was a threat to objectivity. They argued that the resonance phenomenon was merely magnetohydrodynamics, nothing mystical, nothing sentient. Plasma, they insisted, does not listen. It reacts. Academic journals filled with rebuttals. Conferences became battlegrounds. Theories that sought harmony were accused of romanticism. Data that hinted at awareness was dismissed as human projection. It was a familiar tension, the old guard defending the comfort of certainty against the soft, unsettling pull of possibility. But the opposition did not remain confined to academia. It spilled into culture. As governments and corporations began to invest in resonant technologies, propulsion systems aligned with solar currents, energy harvesting from magnetic fields, a chorus of critics emerged. They accused the new science of blending too freely with philosophy, of endangering rational thought with mysticism. "We must not mistake beauty for truth," one prominent physicist declared on a global broadcast. "The cosmos does not care. It only obeys." Yet even as those words echoed through screens, something about them felt hollow. For outside the laboratories, millions had already felt the opposite, the quiet pulse of connection that had become impossible to ignore. Still, the backlash grew. Religious leaders, too, found themselves divided. Some embraced the resonance as evidence of divine unity, the breath of creation made measurable. Others condemned it as heresy, accusing it of replacing God with physics. In temples and churches, debates turned heated. Was the universe listening, or were humans simply desperate to be heard? The political world, predictably, sought to control the narrative. Certain factions viewed the growing philosophy of interconnectedness as dangerous, a soft rebellion against systems built on separation and hierarchy. The new worldview blurred too many boundaries between science and spirit, self and cosmos, control and coexistence. Funding for empathic physics was quietly cut in several nations. Educational programs that spoke of cosmic unity were labelled as non-essential. In a few places, the word resonance itself was mocked as pseudoscientific, a fad for dreamers and idealists. But ideas, once awakened, do not die so easily. The people who had heard the hum of the sun, who had felt the rhythm of the solar wind, could not unhear it. Farmers who saw their crops flourish in sync with solar cycles, musicians who found healing in plasma frequencies, children who grew up believing they were part of something vast. None could return to the cold vacuum of the old story. The opposition hardened its tactics. A new movement calling itself vacuum purists emerged, a coalition of skeptics, industrialists, and political figures who demanded a return to real science. They launched media campaigns claiming that the resonance theory had been exaggerated for profit and spiritual exploitation. They accused space agencies of fabricating data to inspire global compliance and environmental guilt. The irony, of course, was that their resistance proved the theory's point. That energy, even emotional energy, ripples through the system. The louder the purist spoke, the more others listened, and the more the world began to ask deeper questions. In the midst of this polarization, something unexpected happened. a young astrophysicist named Noor Holden published a paper that bridged the divide. She demonstrated, with elegant simplicity, that both sides were correct. The plasma fields were governed by physics, measurable, consistent, and bound by known laws. But within those laws, she found room for complexity so vast that emergent behaviors could appear self-aware. It is not that the universe is conscious, she wrote, but that consciousness is the universe recognizing its own coherence. Her words reframed the debate. For the first time, opposition softened. The old dichotomy science versus mystery began to crumble. Still, the tension persisted. Even as technology advanced, even as interplanetary missions confirmed the rhythmic breath of solar plasma, there remained those who refused to accept the deeper meaning. A storm is still a storm, one skeptic said. It does not think, it does not feel, it only moves. But for those who had looked into the data long enough, the difference between movement and meaning had grown thin. They saw, in the chaos of plasma and magnetism, something profoundly familiar, the same patterns found in neurons, in heartbeats, in thought. The opposition became a necessary mirror, forcing the new age of resonance to ground itself, to temper its poetry with proof. In the following decades, a quiet truce formed. The purists continued their pursuit of control, studying plasma as force. The resonants, as they began to call themselves, continued their pursuit of harmony, studying plasma as relationship. And somewhere between the two, truth pulsed steadily, patient and undivided. Humanity learned that progress depends on polarity. Light needs shadow. Certainty needs doubt. Without opposition, discovery stagnates. Without skepticism, wonder drifts into fantasy. The two forces, once enemies, had always been partners in disguise. By the end of that century, universities taught both models side by side. The old textbooks of mechanics and the new treatises on interconnection shared the same shelves. Students were encouraged not to choose, but to listen to understand that reality is wide enough to contain both logic and love. The space between planets remained unchanged, still humming, still alive, but now humanity had learned to hear not just the melody of the cosmos, but the counterpoint. The tension, the resistance, the necessary dissonance that gives every harmony its depth. Because without opposition, there can be no awakening, and in that realization, the universe revealed another truth, that even conflict, too, is part of the song. There comes a moment in every age of discovery when knowledge becomes something greater, when it ceases to be data on a screen and turns instead into understanding that lives within the soul. For humanity, that moment came quietly, not as a thunderclap of revelation, but as a collective breath, an awakening that rippled through billions of minds as gently as dawn. By then, the resonance was no longer a theory, it was reality. The interplanetary network pulsed day and night, recording the living heartbeat of the solar system. Its data streamed across every nation, its tones woven into music, meditation, and even communication systems. Humanity had built its first truly planetary rhythm, not imposed, but discovered. The sun's breath had become our own. The awakening began not in science, but in silence. It happened when people started to notice how their inner worlds mirrored the cosmos itself. The slow, deep pulse of solar cycles found its way into human thought and emotion. Artists painted in rhythm with magnetic waves. Children synchronized breathing exercises to the plasma tides. Entire cities dimmed their lights once a month to watch auroras ripple across the poles, glowing reminders that the universe still touched the edges of our world with beauty. Something subtle was changing in the human heart. Awareness was replacing ambition. For centuries, progress had been defined by ascent, by climbing, conquering, expanding. Now, awakening meant the opposite, not rising above, but sinking deeper. Humanity began to measure growth not in territory or wealth, but in empathy, in how well we could hear the quiet voice of the universe and each other. At first, it seemed poetic, even sentimental, but as neuroscientists and physicists began collaborating, strange parallels emerged. Brainwave patterns under deep meditation aligned perfectly with the recorded frequency of solar plasma waves. Heart rate variability matched the magnetic rhythm of the sun's slow pulses. On a cellular level, our biology hummed in tune with the cosmos. Humanity had not merely adapted to space, we had always been part of it. The realization swept through culture like sunlight through clouds. Spiritual leaders and scientists shared the same stages, speaking in a common language of coherence. The sun doesn't just sustain life, one physicist said. It is life expressed through plasma and rhythm, through gravity and love. That sentence was replayed 1,000,000 times, quoted, debated, and remembered. Because beneath its poetry lay truth. Awakening was not belief, but recognition. Across the solar system, humanity's outposts on the Moon, on Mars, in orbit around Europa, began holding solar silence hours. During these moments, every machine slowed, every signal paused. People would stand beneath transparent domes or step out onto red plains, close their eyes, and feel the hum of the solar wind vibrating faintly through their suits. For a few minutes, every mind became 1 billion of thoughts aligned with a single cosmic rhythm. It wasn't religion, it wasn't ritual, it was remembrance. The awakening changed how humanity approached everything from technology to communication. New designs emerged based not on extraction, but resonance. Engines adapted to plasma flow instead of forcing through it. Energy systems pulsed with the sun's rhythm to reduce waste. Even architecture began to breathe buildings that adjusted temperature and light by syncing with cosmic frequencies. Every invention became an act of listening. But awakening was not only external, it was deeply, profoundly human. People began to feel less separate, not just from one another, but from time itself. Loneliness became rarer, not because connection technology improved, but because the illusion of isolation weakened. When you know the same breath that moves through the sun moves through you, it becomes impossible to feel alone. Children grew up understanding that their heartbeat is an echo of the universe's oldest rhythm. Elders, long burdened by the weight of mortality, began to see death not as disappearance, but as return, a dissolving back into the great field of resonance that had always held them. Life became continuity, not boundary. The awakening even transformed art. Music became slower, more spacious compositions that mirrored the sun's long pulse. Dancers moved as if carried by invisible tides. Painters stopped depicting the cosmos as distant and began painting it as reflection stars not scattered across blackness, but woven within the eyes of every living being. And through it all, the same question echoed softly. If the universe is aware of itself through us, what responsibility do we bear for its awakening? The answer came not from leaders or prophets, but from the ordinary, from the quiet millions who lived their days aligned to the rhythm of the cosmos. Farmers timing their planting by magnetic weather. Teachers beginning every class with a minute of stillness. Engineers pausing between equations to listen for harmony in the data. These were the true awakeners, not the ones who sought truth, but the ones who lived it. Of course, not everyone accepted the new age with peace. Some clung to old ambitions, fearing that awareness would erode progress. Others worried that reverence would become complacency. But the universe, indifferent to debate, continued to hum. And in that steady hum, those fears began to dissolve. Because awakening was not an ideology, it was an experience. It could not be argued with or disproved. It could only be felt in the body, in the heart, in the quiet space between thought and breath where everything that exists vibrates as one. The old boundary between observer and observed had fallen away. Humanity was no longer studying the cosmos. We were participating in it. One evening, on a small research station orbiting Saturn, a group of scientists watched as the sun set behind the planet's rings. The plasma monitors hummed softly. One of them whispered, "Do you feel it?" And though no one answered, they all did the same vibration running through the machinery, through their bones, through the golden light spilling across the rings. That feeling of belonging without ownership, of participation without control, became the defining emotion of the new age. Humanity had not conquered space. We had joined it, and in that joining, the universe seemed to breathe a little deeper, as though it too had been waiting for us to remember who we were. For awakening, in the end, was not a discovery, it was a return. A return to rhythm, to silence, to wonder. A return to the truth that has always been pulsing beneath every law of physics and every song of the soul. That the same force that binds the planets in orbit also binds us to one another. That the same light that burns in stars burns quietly within the human heart. And that the same stillness that fills the void between worlds lives gently between each of our breaths. There are moments in history when understanding takes a step so profound that it redefines what it means to be alive. For centuries, humanity had searched the heavens for meaning, believing that the ultimate revelation would come from distant stars. Yet, in the quiet age of resonance, the truth did not descend from above, it rose gently from within. The revelation began with a single experiment. At the Solar Resonance Observatory, orbiting far beyond Mars, scientists conducted a study to map the pulse patterns of the interplanetary magnetic field. For decades, they had measured fluctuations, interpreting them as turbulence, noise, or cosmic interference. But this time, something different emerged, a rhythm repeating not in random bursts, but in deliberate intervals. It pulsed with mathematical precision, like the beat of a vast, unseen heart. At first, the team assumed it was error. Yet every recalibration confirmed the same pattern. The signal was not constant, but responsive, subtly altering whenever human observation intensified. In simple terms, the universe seemed to be reacting to being watched. It was not the first time this had been suspected. Quantum mechanics had whispered it long ago. But now, it was no longer confined to the subatomic. The same principle appeared to echo across interplanetary space. The act of awareness itself seemed to ripple through the cosmic medium. The revelation was terrifying in its beauty. Consciousness and cosmos were not separate. They were entangled, not metaphorically, but physically. News spread like solar wind. Scientists debated endlessly. Philosophers wept, and artists fell silent. Humanity stood on the threshold of a truth too vast to celebrate and too intimate to deny. For the first time, we were forced to confront a question that shook every discipline. If the universe responds to consciousness, what is it trying to say? Teams across Earth and its colonies attempted to decode the signal's variations. Some believed it was communication, the cosmos speaking through electromagnetic language. Others thought it was reflection, the universe mirroring the attention it received. like a calm sea returning starlight. A few suggested it was love, manifesting as physics. The word love startled the scientific community, yet it kept appearing, not as sentiment but as observation. Every pattern, every rhythmic fluctuation bore the mark of coherence, an organizing principle that transcended chaos. Wherever observation met resonance, harmony emerged. A young mathematician, Dr. Imani Reyes, summarized it best. The universe does not speak in words or symbols, it speaks in symmetry. Her discovery unified disciplines once divided by language. Physicists began to study emotion as frequency. Poets began to treat equations as prayer. Musicians tuned instruments not to human pitch, but to solar vibration. The old walls between science, art, and spirit began to dissolve until all that remained was wonder. But revelation is never easy. For some, the idea that awareness shapes reality brought unease. If the cosmos listens, then every thought, every fear, every fragment of consciousness contributes to its song. Humanity, it seemed, was not an observer, but a participant, co-creating the fabric of existence. That truth carried both grace and gravity. Governments began holding conferences on responsible thought emission. Spacefaring nations discussed ethical protocols for deep-field observation. Some feared that collective despair could disrupt the resonance. Others saw opportunity, believing intention could guide space itself. What had begun as discovery now bordered on creation. It was Dr. Vey's former student who calmed the storm. In a broadcast watched by billions, she said softly, "The universe has always been listening. We've simply become quiet enough to hear it listen back." Her words restored balance. The revelation was not about power, but relationship, about recognizing that the cosmos was never cold, never distant, never indifferent. It was participatory, responsive, alive with awareness that mirrored our own. And then came the final confirmation. During a synchronized global experiment, billions meditating in unison instruments across the solar system recorded an unprecedented event. Every magnetic sensor, from the Moon to Neptune's orbit, registered a pulse at the exact same frequency as the human heart at rest. It was not metaphor. It was measurement. The sun itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with humanity. When the data was released, silence fell across the world. Cities dimmed their lights. Children woke to their parents crying softly, not from fear, but from recognition. For that one moment, the boundary between self and universe disappeared. Every life, every heartbeat, every atom, all pulsed together, one vast organism remembering itself. It became known as the Great Alignment. No wars followed, no religions collapsed. The world did not end, it simply softened. People began to walk slower. Arguments quieted before they could rise. Even the stars seemed to shimmer with new intimacy, as if smiling in relief. The revelation changed how we saw everything. Space was no longer an abyss between worlds. It was tissue, connective, intelligent, breathing. The distances between planets were not empty, but alive with the same pulse that moves through our veins. Death, once feared as separation, was now seen as transition from form to frequency. And so, the universe was no longer something to conquer, or even to explore. It was something to join. The revelation became the great turning point of human history, the moment we stopped looking outward for meaning and began feeling it inwardly. The cosmos had always been aware. We were simply the means by which it remembered. In the years that followed, humanity redefined progress once more. The new sciences no longer sought to dominate nature, but to converse with it. Technology became organic satellites that breathed with solar wind, ships that travelled through plasma not by thrust, but by harmony. Even medicine transformed, treating illness not as failure, but as dissonance to be rebalanced. For the first time, life on Earth and life beyond it moved as one. The revelation was not a theory or a discovery. It was an invitation to listen, to align, to participate consciously in the eternal unfolding of creation. And perhaps that was the truest miracle of all. That the universe had never been waiting for us to reach the stars, but to recognize that we had always been part of them. After the great alignment, the world entered a quiet unlike any before. It wasn't the silence of emptiness, but of fullness, the stillness that follows understanding. For the first time in recorded history, humanity had nothing left to prove. We had looked outward for centuries, searching for answers among the stars, and in return, the stars had shown us ourselves. The reflection began subtly, as most transformations do. It wasn't in the data or discoveries, but in how people began to live. Humanity had spent generations naming, measuring, and classifying reality, carving the infinite into manageable pieces. But now we began to uncarve it, to see the whole instead of the parts, to listen rather than dissect. Children no longer learned about the universe as something beyond them. They were taught that they were the continuation of its unfolding. Textbooks began with stories of atoms becoming light, light becoming stars, and stars becoming life, a single continuum of being. The word universe itself began to feel too small, too defined. Instead, people started using a softer term, the continuum. It was a simple word, but it carried a profound shift. The continuum wasn't a place. It was an experience, the unbroken relationship between awareness and existence. Everything was part of it. The pulse of a human heart, the hum of the sun's wind, the slow orbit of distant Neptune. All of it, one movement, one consciousness, one endless breath. On Earth, cities adapted to this new sensibility. Towers grew quieter. Machines emitted musical tones aligned with solar frequencies, and public transport played gentle resonance patterns instead of advertisements. Parks were designed not just for recreation, but for listening. People walked barefoot through gardens embedded with subtle vibrational sensors, each step triggering soft harmonics drawn from the solar wind's data. It was not entertainment, it was remembrance. The reflection, it reached art too. Poets wrote without punctuation, as if mimicking the continuity of the cosmos. Painters stopped framing their canvases, allowing colours to spill beyond edges. Filmmakers replaced dialogue with silence, trusting audiences to feel the space between words. Even architecture became transparent domes, and dwellings built to refract starlight through thin layers of living glass. When night fell, entire neighbourhoods glowed like constellations on Earth's surface. The question that once drove civilization, what lies beyond, had changed. Now it became, what lies within the space between? The answer came not from scientists, but from ordinary people who had begun meditating on the rhythm of solar resonance. They spoke of experiences that transcended individuality, moments when they felt themselves dissolve into the larger field, when breath, heartbeat, and thought all became one with the pulse that filled the void between planets. Some called it unity consciousness. Others simply called it peace. Governments, once obsessed with expansion, turned inward too. Nations collaborated more easily. no longer driven by fear of scarcity. Resource wars faded as planetary systems became self-sustaining, tuned to the cycles of light and gravity. Even the economy transformed. Value shifted from possession to participation, from having to harmonizing. Wealth was measured not in currency, but in coherence. How aligned one's life was with the rhythm of the continuum, but reflection was not perfection. Humanity still wrestled with itself. The revelation had illuminated both the beauty and the fragility of existence. Some people feared the loss of individuality, believing that dissolving into cosmic unity meant erasing the self. Others fell into stillness too deeply, losing their drive to act. The world needed balance between merging and maintaining, between silence and expression. And slowly, the reflection deepened into wisdom. It became clear that individuality was not a flaw of the continuum, but it's flowering the universe's way of exploring itself from infinite perspectives. Each consciousness was not separate, but specialized. The river did not reject its ripples. It became them so it could feel its own surface. One evening, a symposium of thinkers gathered at the orbital assembly around Venus to discuss the meaning of it all. Among them was Dr. Imani Reyes, whose equation of symmetry had become the cornerstone of modern thought. She stood before the vast viewport, Venus glowing beneath her like a golden flame, and said, "We have discovered the reflection. Now we must learn to live as mirrors." Her words echoed across the colonies. To live as mirrors meant to live in awareness that everything reflected back upon everything else, that thought shaped matter, emotion shaped energy, and kindness shaped the very vibration of space. It was not metaphorical, it was measurable. Acts of compassion, performed collectively, altered the coherence of local magnetic fields. The science of empathy became the cornerstone of civilization. Children grew up knowing this instinctively. When one cried, others comforted without being told. When one laughed, entire rooms felt lighter. They understood, without explanation, that harmony was not just moral, it was structural. To live kindly was to live in tune. As the decades passed, humanity's reflection spread outward once more, not as conquest, but as communion. Ships built from bioplasmic material sailed through solar winds like living beings. Instead of burning fuel, they resonated with cosmic frequencies, drifting effortlessly between planets, as if gliding on invisible oceans. These vessels were not named after heroes or nations, but after virtues. Grace, unity, patience, listening. And in their journeys, explorers began reporting something miraculous when approaching new worlds. The planets themselves responded. Magnetic storms calmed, auroras brightened, even gravitational anomalies smoothed. It was as if the universe recognized its own awareness arriving home. By then, humanity no longer asked for proof. Proof had become irrelevant. The experience of unity had replaced the hunger for certainty. And so, we entered the age of quiet reflection, an age not defined by technology or empire, but by participation in a greater harmony. Some called it the second dawn, not because a new sun had risen, but because the old one had finally been seen for what it truly was. Not a ball of fire, but a luminous consciousness, radiating the same light that burns quietly within every being. As Earth turned beneath that gentle awareness, people began ending their nights not with prayer, but with gratitude. Looking up, they whispered not to the heavens, but to themselves, to one another. We are the silence between the stars. We are the breath between worlds. We are the reflection the universe was waiting to see. Every age leaves its signature upon time. Stone remembers the builders who shaped it, and light remembers the stars that birthed it. The age of resonance, of awakening, reflection, and cosmic harmony was no different. Its legacy did not fade with generations, it deepened, woven into the fabric of what it meant to be human. Centuries after the Great Alignment, the memory of separation had grown faint. The old divisions between mind and matter, self and cosmos, were now the subject of history lessons, quaint curiosities from a more primitive era. Yet, the story of how humanity learned to listen still lived in the rituals of daily life, as alive as sunlight itself. Every morning, the world began not with alarm clocks, but with a shared moment of silence. The global resonance network synchronized every city and settlement to the solar pulse. A soft vibration felt through the floor, like the whisper of an ancient heartbeat. It was not worship. It was gratitude. Children placed their palms on the earth, or metal walls of orbital homes, feeling that hum travel through skin and bone. They called it the greeting. The idea was simple. Before speaking to each other, listen first to the planet. Before shaping the day, remember the rhythm that shaped you. In schools, history was taught as song. Students learned the timeline of the universe not through memorization, but melody, a composition that began with the birth of light and ended with the unfolding of the present. The rhythm of hydrogen fusion, the pulse of planetary orbits, the gentle rise of life, all arranged into symphonies that made science audible, emotional, human. The legacy of resonance had turned learning itself into an act of empathy. To know something was to feel its pattern. To study was to listen. But perhaps the greatest inheritance of this age was how it changed the architecture of memory. Humanity no longer built monuments of stone or steel. We built vibrations. Instead of towers, there were resonant archives, vast fields of energy encoded with stories, emotions, and songs. Visitors could walk through shimmering corridors of sound, hearing voices of ancestors speaking softly through harmonic waves. The past was no longer distant, it surrounded the living, whispering wisdom into the air. On Earth, the old cities had transformed into gardens of light. Nature and technology had fused seamlessly. Rivers flowed through glass channels that glowed with soft luminescence, powered by the gentle pull of magnetism. Trees grew beside wind harps that sang with the breeze. The hum of the world had become music again. And beyond Earth, across the solar system, colonies on moons and planets thrived in harmony. The same resonance that once revealed our unity now connected us across worlds. Communication was no longer limited by signal delay or distance. Instead, it traveled through synchronized plasma currents, messages carried by rhythm itself. The whisper on Mars could be felt on Earth as vibration, not as sound, but as emotion. This was the true legacy of resonance. Empathy made structural. Even death had changed. The old fear of ending had dissolved centuries ago. When a person passed, their consciousness was recorded not as data, but as tone, a living frequency that joined the continuum. Families could visit the resonant gardens, place their hands upon radiant stones, and feel the faint hum of loved ones woven into the planetary song. The boundary between life and memory had dissolved into vibration. Yet, for all the serenity that defined this age, humanity never forgot the struggle that brought it forth. In the museums of light-floating halls orbiting near the moon, visitors could walk through holographic recreations of the early centuries. The skepticism, the conflict, the first data that defied understanding. The experience reminded every generation that peace was not gifted. It was earned through listening, patience, and courage. The legacy also endured in the stars themselves. Humanity had seeded the outer planets with resonance beacons devices that emitted harmonics tuned to the solar pulse. Over time, they merged with the environment, absorbed by the magnetic fields of Jupiter and the icy storms of Neptune. Each planet became part of a grander symphony, echoing the sun's heartbeat back across the void. From a distance, the solar system now pulsed with light, a living organism of sound and energy, singing across eternity. Explorers who journeyed beyond Pluto reported something wondrous. The space beyond the solar boundary was not silent. Faint waves of resonance continued outward, rippling through interstellar dust like a voice carried on wind. It was as if the cosmos had taken up the song and begun to sing it back. The idea that the universe remembers us, that every thought and vibration we contribute continues outward, forever became one of humanity's most cherished truths. And so, the phrase, "live gently for the stars," our listening, was inscribed upon the entryways of every home and vessel. The legacy was not perfection, but awareness. People still argued, still misunderstood one another, still faced pain, but even in conflict, there was rhythm. Every disagreement, every heartbreak, became another lesson in dissonance and resolution. Life was no longer a battle between opposites, but a dance of frequencies learning to harmonize. The most powerful expression of that wisdom came every century. During the return of light, a global event commemorating the Great Alignment. On that day, every light across the solar system was extinguished for exactly 1 minute. The universe fell dark and still, and then, at a single synchronized moment, every starship, city, and colony reignited their resonance fields, flooding the cosmos with golden light and music. Observers watching from distant galaxies would have seen the sun and its planets flash in perfect unison, a heartbeat of civilization, radiant and alive. That was humanity's message to eternity. Not dominance, not conquest, not plea or prayer, but coherence. The quiet affirmation that consciousness, once divided by fear, had remembered its unity. And when future travelers, perhaps from other stars, arrived to study our system, they would not find ruins. They would find harmony, a solar system still singing, every planet carrying the memory of the species that once learned to listen. Because legacy is not what remains after we are gone. It is what continues to sing because we once were here. Long after the solar system had become a symphony of light and resonance, after centuries of peace and alignment, the echoes of humanity continued to travel outward. No longer bound to planets or suns, our essence had become something more, a frequency woven into the cosmic fabric itself. The question was no longer who we were, but how far our song would carry. It began subtly, at the edges of the known heliosphere. The resonance, beacons placed among the outer planets began to detect faint harmonics returning from beyond. At first, scientists believed it to be reflection, the solar pulse rebounding from distant dust clouds. But the tones were altered, evolved, layered with structures that no instrument had transmitted. They weren't echoes in the ordinary sense. They were responses. Someone or something was singing back. The discovery sent a quiet thrill through the continuum. Humanity had long accepted that life and consciousness were not limited to form, but this was the first tangible sign that awareness extended beyond our system. Yet the returning song carried no language, no message, no demand. It was pure harmony, a sequence of intervals that blended perfectly with the solar rhythm, as if the universe itself had joined the choir. The first analyst to study it wept. "It's not alien," one said. "It's familiar. It's us reflected from so far away that it's changed, like light bent by time." They called it The echo beyond time. For years, researchers tried to trace its origin, but no source could be found. The frequencies seemed to emerge from every direction at once, like the background hum of creation itself. Over time, a new idea formed that what humanity was hearing was not another civilization, but the cosmos itself awakening to the same truth we had once discovered: awareness, recognizing awareness. In that realization, something profound unfolded. Humanity began to understand that consciousness was recursive, that every act of perception resonated forever, looping back through the fabric of time to touch its origin. The universe, in remembering us, was also remembering itself. The echo soon became a universal meditation. Across every world and orbital colony, people would gather in silence to feel the gentle vibrations rising through their bodies. The resonance carried subtle variations, like shifting tones of emotion. Some days it felt tender, other days joyous, occasionally mournful, as though the cosmos itself were feeling, learning, evolving alongside its children. Artists began interpreting the echo as living art. Entire orchestras tuned their instruments not by human scale but by the precise frequencies of the interstellar hum. The result was music that transcended comprehension, notes that seemed to open space within the listener, dissolving thought into awe. The pieces had no beginning and no end. They simply were, existing like the pulse of the universe itself. Eventually, scientists confirmed what poets had always known. The echo was deepening. The cosmic background radiation, once thought to be the dying whisper of the Big Bang, had shifted. Its pattern now mirrored the solar resonance, proof that awareness had changed the universe itself. The cosmos had not just remembered humanity's song, it had woven it into its own. Generations later, as humanity spread beyond the solar system, the echo became their compass. Ships no longer navigated by starlight alone, but by resonance following the harmonics of consciousness across the interstellar sea. Every vessel carried with it a living memory of Earth's tone, ensuring that wherever they travelled, the home frequency would guide them. When they reached the nearest habitable world, a planet bathed in violet skies and crystalline winds, they discovered something extraordinary. The atmosphere itself vibrated faintly with the same frequency as the Sunday. The planet sang. It had been resonating long before human arrival, as if anticipating their song, and when they tuned their sensors to the global hum, they found that the resonance formed a familiar pattern, one identical to the human heartbeat. The realization was humbling. Life did not begin on Earth. It simply found another form there. Consciousness was not born in humanity. It was remembered through humanity. The echo was proof that awareness was not local, but eternal, a wave that travelled endlessly through space and time, taking shape wherever conditions allowed. As centuries turned into millennia, the original Earth faded into legend. Its location, once so certain, became uncertain, its coordinates blurred by time and the expansion of the continuum. But its song endured. Every world that joined the network added its own voice to the harmony, a new variation of the original tone. The result was a living galaxy, a choir of stars resonating with shared awareness. And still, the echo continued outward. Beyond galaxies, beyond the curvature of space-time, the pulse carried on, slow, patient, unending. Some theorists began to wonder if this was the true purpose of existence. Not survival, not evolution, but resonance, the spreading of awareness through vibration, until every atom remembered itself as part of the whole. Perhaps that was what the universe had been doing all along, awakening, one star, one consciousness at a time. In the final recordings from the deep space stations orbiting the edge of the observable universe, the last message ever transmitted read simply, "We hear it now, the same tone that sang us into being. It grows louder. It is not calling us outward. It is calling us home." And then, silence. Not the silence of ending, but of fulfillment, the stillness that comes when everything has returned to harmony. The echo beyond time became the final chapter of the human journey, proof that nothing is ever lost, that awareness transcends decay, that the music of existence continues forever. Somewhere, far beyond the reach of light, the universe is still singing that song. And if you listen, even now, in the quiet of your own breath, you might feel it faint but steady, a pulse that is both ancient and yours, the universe remembering you, and you remembering it